And good morning, everyone, and welcome to Small Biz Matters, the half-hour program where you work on your business rather than in it. Thank you for joining me today. Your trusted host, Alexi Boyd from Boyd Office Management Services, proud supporters of Triple H. And this is Small Biz, of course. Thank you for joining us on the air today. We've had a huge run of fantastic guests over the last few weeks, and we're joined today with Brian Doricott, who's going to be talking to us all about raising capital, which is actually sort of something that's really quite tricky for businesses. Talking to businesses as we do, we talk to one another, we get together, we get in networking groups. And one of the problems that we always face is growth. And part of that point of growth, of course, is raising the capital in which to grow. Now, you might be looking at raising capital to create an investment. You might be looking into buying some more equipment or machinery for your business. You might be looking to grow your staff, but you need that upfront support. And what I think a lot of us think about when we consider that and consider growth is we just go big four banks and we say, oh, we'll forget it, because as far as they're concerned, I earn nothing, because all they do is they look at my tax return and they go, well, you earn nothing, so we're not going to give you any money, so forget it. And that really, honestly, is realistically what a lot of us think of, and that's how we're treated as the banks. But what we need to remember is that that's not the only option, and there's certainly a lot of different ways and methods, and it's a big picture thing that you need to look at. And Brian is here with us today. Now, I always start with our journeys. Welcome to the show, first of all, Brian.
Oh, nice to be here.
Now, the first thing I like to ask my guests is, what led you into this specialism? What was it about your expertise or your previous experience that really drove you to start your own business and impart this sort of knowledge onto other businesses?
Many years ago, when I was left college, I went to work in two large corporate organisations. And one of the things I discovered that corporate and I did not get on very well. I didn't like the corporate politics that go on and decisions that don't make sense when it comes to delivering products or services to customers. So as a result of that, I went to start my own business.
So one of the things was you were sort of craving to give the service and the one-on-one relationships that you just can't get when you exist in that corporate world.
Absolutely, and make decisions that are sensible for the customer rather than sensible for the company. Because a lot of the time I found that decisions were completely nonsensical if you were thinking of it from the view of any of the customers that we had. And I find that quite distressing, because I thought the whole point of the exercise is we're trying to help the customers do better in their work, their jobs, whatever it is that they are doing. And
that just solidifies what a lot of us believe, is that those big companies are not necessarily there to service the individual one of 3-4 million customers, but it's there to service the needs of their shareholders and the business growth. And if treading on the individual customer and annoying them and making their life difficult, that's not going to sit well with you, obviously.
No, and to be fair to some of the large businesses, it's just the way they've grown up. They've built internally, they've built procedures which protect them from the outside world to make it a lot easier for their employees to do their jobs. How many times have you met an employee for a bank, for example, who will just read a script to you? And they'll do that every day. And the reason they do that is because it's easy. They don't get in trouble. They can progress their career. So for them personally, it makes a lot of sense. However, for everybody else who's on the receiving end of the script, it makes absolutely no sense at all. And that's one of the issues, I think, with the larger companies. When you sort of get to 50, 100 people, it's a very dangerous area to sort of enter, because you lose contact with the people who are actually paying the money that keep the company afloat. And when that disconnect happens, that's really bad news. And that's why I like working with small businesses, because there is the connection between real people who are buying the product or service 100% of the time.
And it is really what we think about when we think of financial institutions and the way that we are treated as customers, particularly as small business. I'm going to put it out there, and I'm going to say that I think that we are discriminated against as from those large banks when it comes to lending and when it comes to criteria. And I might be completely wrong. I'm just looking at it from a single person consumer perspective. But it is what I hear.
But it is true. And from a bank's point of view, if they've got the choice of lending a small business $20,000...
You nearly said pounds.
I nearly said pounds. I had to think for a minute there. Yeah, if the bank's got the choice of lending you $20,000 or even $100,000, and they're looking at the cost of that transaction and the likelihoods of it going wrong, and they say, well, actually, to make a profit on this, we've got to do 100 of these transactions. And somebody comes along and asks for 100 million, which one are they going to pick? They're always going to pick the 100 million because it's easier for them to understand and manage and all those other things that they have to do in the background to support the shareholders.
So one of the things is we need to ask for more money.
Yeah. Make it a big ask.
Yeah, otherwise it doesn't become worth a while. And it is just a numbers game. It is just algorithms and them, I don't want to say them versus us, but in a way it is their time versus the value that they get out of loaning us that money. Are we going to be somebody who's and then all risk averse and all those risk algorithms and things?
They're going to look at how likely are we to pay that money back? So if you look at a bank interest rate of say 15%, you think, wow, that's a lot of money. They can get the money at 5%. Where does the 10% go? Well, the answer is they've got to have somebody, a human being, manage your loan for the whole period of the loan. They've got to work out whether it's worth making that loan. So somebody's going to spend a couple of hours looking through all the documentation, and that's all got to be paid for. Then if the loan goes bad, then the other loans they've taken out have to pay for that one as well. So they have to pay for the capital of the loan. So you can very easily see that margin is very quickly eaten up for a bank because they cannot put enough effort in to make a good decision on the risk basis of the loan because they don't know you. They know nothing about you. So they have to learn about you every time you speak to them. And
when they're learning, talk to me through what sort of data they typically ask for. So say I'm a small business and I'm thinking about taking out, as you said, a $20,000 loan. That's a fairly typical amount for small business. I've done the shop around. I've kind of tried to understand their website and what the conditions are and what interest rate I'll be paying if I'm paying off X number. And I come to this bank that I think is going to give me the best. What are they going to be asking for? They're
certainly going to be asking for a business plan with a really good understanding of how you're going to pay the money back. Because at the end of the day, they want that money to be returned to them, preferably with a large profit. And that's what they're going to be looking at. So when you look at all the material you provide to the bank, it's almost the case for every line of every document that you look at, you need to ask yourself in the background, is this going to lower the risk or make it look a bigger risk to the bank from the bank's point of view? And if every line you put in there saying this reduces the risk, that is something that's going to play out in your favour when it comes down to the human side of analysis. So there's two hurdles. There's the computational side, which is basically, as you mentioned, Alexi, an algorithm that looks at all the numbers, which is why they need a business plan. There's an algorithm that's going to have a look at the numbers and give an answer. And then there's going to be the human side that says, okay, let's look at it and see if we can get an understanding of what's going forward. Now,
so there is a human element.
There is a human element. There will always be a human element.
But that's not going to override the little guy who wants $20,000 if the algorithm says no. It's like a computer says no. And so his computer's going to say no. They're not going to care enough. Is that what the difference is between?
Pretty much the case. If the algorithm says no straight up, then they're not going to spend any more time on it. It's not worth their effort because there's going to be another business comes along where the algorithm says yes. And it's almost irrelevant whether the algorithm is right or wrong. It's what it says because a bank employee, his salary depends on him following the rules. So he's not going to go out on a limb and say, actually, this is a brilliant business. Okay, they haven't filled the form in right, because if it goes wrong, he's out of a job. So he's mandated to follow whatever the algorithms say. So once you pass that stage and it becomes the human level where you talk about credit committees and people like that, then and it's typically a bank manager in a small branch, they're going to be looking at the human risk element.
And that's where your business plan, or less of the numbers and more of the forward planning, comes into things, and expected sales and that sort of stuff. So what you're saying is people really need to have, I guess, their finances together before they consider doing anything like that. Would that be right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So if I'm looking at the algorithm side of things and I'm looking at the human side of things, then one of the aspects is, first of all, you have to consider that the algorithm is the biggest element of it. That's the biggest part. If you don't meet the algorithm, they're not going to waste any more time. I think that's what we understand, how much time is worth. And I think we forget that as a big business, they still look at the amount of time it takes for each person to examine this case, this situation. We have to consider that they are a business too, and that's Absolutely. What they're factoring into their decision-making process.
Absolutely. And that's why they use algorithms, because it's a very quick way to sift through a large amount of information.
Okay, so I've applied for $20,000 and the bank has asked me for probably my tax return.
Yeah.
Now, my tax return is not going to be favourable for me getting a $20,000 loan because any sensible business owner has negated their tax as much as possible. They've put home office expenses, they've put car expenses if they've kept a car log and they've done it all accurately. They've tried to minimise their tax burden because that's what their accountant and that's what logic tells us to do. But that stuffs us if we want to be able to take out a loan with the bank, right?
I wouldn't agree with that. I think if you are a diligent business owner, you should be mitigating your tax as far as absolutely possible. It's actually a bad thing to be paying too much tax. It's great to be paying tax because it means you're making a profit, but paying too much is a bad thing. So the banks are also aware that businesses spend money mitigating tax. Let's face it, we know that large businesses such as Google mitigate tax.
Oh yes, out the wazoo.
So, and they also know small businesses do exactly the same. That's why the business plan is important as well, because that demonstrates perhaps the reality of what's going forward. So at the end of the year, you should have a set of accounts. There's a process of writing back in some of the tax changes that are made for a tax return back into the accounts, so that the bank can see what the business is actually doing. So rather than saying we look at the profit line, we look at the turnover.
What if you're applying for this loan and the bank says, look, we just want to see your tax return, nothing else? Then can you argue back and say, look, I've got more evidence to show moving forward cash flow. I've got my accountant who's ready to put some figures together for me that shows not necessarily my tax position, but my actual income position and cash flow forecast, for example?
I would say it depends on the amount of money you're looking for and who you're talking to at the bank. So does the person that you're talking to at the bank have the authority to make decisions? So if you are talking to the bank manager, you're talking about a loan of $20,000, that may well be a conversation you could have. If you're looking for a larger amount, it may well be it's beyond his loan limit. So he might have a loan limit of $50,000. So if you're going in with $100,000, he says, well, it doesn't actually matter how much you persuade me. I've still got to get the check through the algorithm. Once the algorithm's gone, then I can say yes or no. So try and find out how much the person you're talking to, how much control do they have? And actually, it's the same across all types of capital raise. It's always about finding out what the opposite party has and how much control they have over what they're offering you.
I'll just take you to pause there. We're going to jump in to do some community service announcements. When we come back from the break, it'll be an interesting conversation to talk about those different options. So when we've talked a lot about banks and the algorithms because that's sort of the go-to people that we go for. And we might come back and talk about other options for lending. You are listening to Small Biz Matters, the half-hour program where you work on your business rather than in it. This is Triple H 100.1 FM. So today on Small Biz, we are talking to Brian and we're talking all about raising capital for your business. Just before the break, if you were listening, we were talking about talking to the big banks. What do they expect to hear? What are they considering when they consider your typical loan amount of, say, for example, $20,000? And what do you have to have prepared when you're approaching them? So let's talk a little bit more about other options when it comes to raising capital. So the other types of capital. Can you take me through some other examples? And should we really be nervous about them anymore, or should we keep our minds open to those as options as small businesses?
My view is you should keep your mind open on everything because you don't know what's going to come around the corner and help you out or hinder you depending on how things are going. So there are two big sources of money. One of them is basically taking a punt on the future, which is by taking a loan. So in essence, you're taking a loan on a loan of money against some asset and saying we will pay you back as a result of some income, so that you're proving you're good for the money. The other option you have as a business is to sell a part of that business. And we call that selling equity or selling shares.
Now, most people are just going to have experience in this watching Shark Tank.
Absolutely.
Is that actually... If I watch enough episodes of that, do I kind of get it? Do I understand the concept of they buy into the business and they get X percentage? Is that essentially, big picture, what it is?
That's essentially what it is. I mean, you have to remember that Shark Tank is entertainment.
Yes, good point.
It really is entertainment. Having said that, if you are ever looking to talk to business angels or venture capitalists, the questions they ask on Shark Tank will be typically the sort of questions that are asked. So it's a good preparation, but don't expect them to be quite so adversarial or maybe even silly when it comes to answering the questions, because generally anybody who's investing in business are very polite and they're generally interested in your business. Otherwise, why would they be talking to you?
That's right, yeah. They're going to vet you. Somebody lower down the chain is going to vet you before they chat to you, and if you're lucky enough to get them to chat to you, be prepared.
Yeah, and if there's one thing you're talking to when you're selling equity, or one thing you must do when you're selling equity, that will really make you stand out above everybody else, because it's a crowded scene. There are a lot of people looking to sell portions of their company to take them forward. The one thing you have to do is be really enthusiastic. You have to be really keen, have to really know your stuff. You have to be an expert. You have to demonstrate that you know exactly what you're talking about. If you come across as somebody who's basically falling asleep while talking to somebody about equity or selling your company or about what you're doing, they're going to fall asleep at the same time. And
so it's a pitch. It really is a sales pitch for your business. You're selling a chunk of your business, so be prepared to sell.
Absolutely, and it's different from a product sell. And that's one of the big things to remember. If you're selling product, it's quite straightforward. You say, here's my widget, here's my service. It's very well defined because you've been doing it for 10, 15, maybe even a year, however long, but you know your business, you know why people want it. You've been talking to customers for a long time. When you're selling your business or a portion of your business, you're selling a vision of the future. So you're saying, my business is a pot of gold, but to get to that pot of gold, I need some more money. The reason I need some more money is because, and then you'll have a series of reasons. But if you have to be enthusiastic, you have to believe that pot of gold is there, because you're an expert in how your business operates.
And you also have to be prepared for the fact that they're going to push back, they're going to negotiate, they're going to want more for what you've expected to give them. They're going to demand more than what you think you're willing to give. Are they going to play hardball with you?
Is it hardball or is it negotiation?
Yeah.
It's in their interest to do so, so they will. But that's where, in a sense, if you're selling a portion of your company in the same way as you're selling a product, the more you can get somebody hooked on your product before you come to the money bit, the less likely the money is going to be a problem. I
see. So you need to switch the algorithm around. You need to move the people element first and the algorithm second.
Effectively, yes. Yeah. And when you're talking equity, there generally aren't algorithms out there that will solve the problem. People have tried it. There are some that will do some of it. One of the problems with some of the algorithms is they cost about $10,000 to run.
Right.
Per company. That kind of sinks most investment propositions, certainly in the early stages.
Okay.
So again, it's a one-to-one relationship in a sense. How much does the person you're talking to understand the business and believe in your expertise and knowledge? So a lot of the questions and the pushback you'll get, it might feel like pushback, but actually it's, I want to know more. It's
them doing due diligence, really.
Yeah.
When it comes to their money.
Absolutely. And there's a story I have. I was looking at doing a business angel investment myself, and I went down to see somebody. It's a 2-hour drive. And this particular investment is to do with materials, as in clothing material. And I know nothing about clothing material. Sure, I can sew a button onto something, but
you know more than me then. Well done.
And the issue was then, how do I measure the expertise of the person I'm talking to? Because clearly, if that's a central part of the business, how am I going to know? And I knew somebody else who, funny enough, was searching for money for their own company, but who was an expert in materials. And I said to them, look, do you mind spending an afternoon? Come down with me, have a chat with the guy, and I'd just be interested in your thoughts afterwards. So we did it. We spent about an hour and a half chatting to the guy, and we came back, and I said in the car on the way back, I said, so what is your biggest learning from doing this? And she said, I found I had to stop asking questions.
And listen.
Well, she realised that she knew about materials and started asking questions about how he was solving problems with the materials, and she knew there were problems there. I mean, I didn't know there were problems, but she knew what the problems were. So she's really interested. She genuinely got interested. She was asking because she just wanted to know. She thought, here is somebody who knows how to solve the problem. I don't know how to solve the problem. Please explain it to me. He, on the other hand, thought it was a case of, you're trying to test me out and trip me up. You're trying to trick me into giving an answer that's wrong. And so he came across as a very negative viewpoint of it. And so she said after that, having got to that point and seeing him pull back and realising, actually, I have to stop, in a sense, being interested in what he's doing and learning more from an expert, because she felt she's learning from an expert. She had to pull back. She realised that when she was in a similar case herself and looking for money from investors, she had had that feeling of being tested. And now she totally understood why people said, actually, you have people coming to an expert to ask about how things are done. And that's quite often why they're asking the questions.
Right. They want you to prove that you are the expert. And if they're asking those questions, perhaps they're showing an interest, not necessarily a reason for you to become defensive, and they're not questioning what you're doing, but rather they really want to know that you, A, know your stuff, but B, they actually might be interested in what you're saying. So that is known as selling equity.
Absolutely.
And that is what you do when you are is it called investor capital, or is it called, I just want to know the terminology so when people are learning.
Investment capital,
Investment capital. So it's selling equity in your business, which is your business.
Yes.
And you, of course, as per Shark Tank, will be requested to sell a certain proportion, and that negotiations, you'll need to produce all your funding and all your figures and cash forecasts and things like that. So, okay, so that's one option. Take me through crowdsourcing.
Now, there are actually two types of crowdsourcing, funnily enough. There's the pre-sales crowdsourcing, which basically says, okay, I think if I produce 1,000 of these, then I can do it for $10.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't get that money together up front. I can't source enough money to get the 10,000 built up front.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I'm not sure I could sell 1,000 of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to go through the crowdsourcing route and see if I can sell 1,000. And when I hit that target, I get the 10,000 in the bank and I produce them and deliver them.
Right.
And that's one form of crowdsourcing. That's really a pre-sales form of crowdsourcing.
Oh, okay, so it's almost selling units before you start, so you have a gauge of the market, and then you have money in the bank in which you can invest to purchase more and produce more of what you do.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay.
And so typically when you're putting your plan together for that, you'll know very accurately what your unit cost is going to be. You'll have to include all your development costs, all the other time in there as well. So you know how much it's going to cost to produce a unit.
Yeah, don't forget your time, everyone. It's not just about the materials that come push together to make the widget. You have to include your time and any staff time and all the other stuff. And
believe me, when an investor, a business angel sees a plan with no CEO time in it, they'll walk away very quickly because they know they can't live off air.
Yeah, and you've also not valued your own time enough to say that you're worth investing in. So that's one option, is to look at sort of selling a certain quantity to begin with. But what about that whole everyone give me $10? 1 million people give me $10. How does that work?
Well, that's for the pre-sales solution, and then the other way of doing crowdsourcing is for equity. This is currently, as far as I understand, not legal yet in Australia.
Oh. For
the retail investment side, if you're a sophisticated investor and you're putting more than $50,000 in per lump, then at the moment you can do it. It can be done in New Zealand, it can be done in the US. They're looking at changing the regulations here so it becomes more easy to manage. That's
because I would presume we have such comparatively heavy regulation on our banking sector and our financial sector, and this is considered a financial product.
It is.
Not a bad thing, mind you.
I think it's quite sensible, because the other side, the reason it's there is to protect people who cannot measure the quality of a company. So you don't end up selling basically dreams to people who've got no ability to understand whether the dream is true. And that's why the protection is there. So it's absolutely right, the protection should be there. The question is, are we overprotective? And that's a much finer line, and something that those people that are in the crowdsourcing arena are saying we're overprotective, and those people in the regulatory arena are saying we're not protecting them enough. So there's a little battle going on there between the two arms of the two areas. Eventually they'll come to an agreement. It looks like they're going to go the crowdsourcing route for equity with some specific controls in there, and those controls are what we're not aware of yet, and they will be published when they become clear.
So this is where I think it gets a little bit confusing as a small business. So we understand the big banks, we understand how they operate. We can understand now, thanks to you, the equity model and selling parts of your business and looking for someone who is an investor. With the crowdsourcing, this sort of situation is where you have multiple people who invest a certain amount in your business, and then you give back their money with interest. Is it just about the money? It's not about them buying a percentage of the business. They're just loaning you the funds? Yes,
you can do crowdsourced loans rather than crowdsourced equity as well. So you may well have, I can't remember the names of the companies in Australia that are actually doing crowdsourced funding for companies. But typically your investors will be putting $10 per company.
Yes.
But there might be 1,000 of them to get the $10,000 that the company needs.
Okay.
And the online platform is basically trying to replace the banks in providing the loan capital for the companies.
And they're sort of spreading the risk, I guess, for the people who are investing. If they're investing only small amounts multiplied by 100 or 1,000, it becomes a little bit more accessible for them, and the risk is quite low for those investing, but the funds are still there for the people who need it.
That's right. But there's still hurdles to overcome for the companies that are seeking the money, because clearly the crowdsourcing people can't have too many failures, because then investors will lose money.
Yeah.
So there's still credit controls. They'll do background checks and all those sorts of things that you would expect from a bank, but maybe not quite as arduous as a bank. So I think if you're looking at what's required, how much collateral is required to get the loan, I think your crowdsourcing loan will be a lower collateral than it would a bank.
Well, it's definitely something to investigate. And the other one, of course, is, and I think some businesses who will have recently, say, for example, they've become a PTY Ltd, and they understand that splitting the directors into two directors, a husband and wife team, for example. How does the selling of shares work? So if you're selling shares of your business to shareholders, creating shareholders in your business, essentially.
Creating shareholders is technically really easy. From the company point of view, you receive a check, it goes into your accounts. You issue a share certificate, you register it at ASIC, and the job's done.
Right. It's just what proportion of shares you're willing to give up.
It's, the number of shares and the amount of money, that's the negotiation bit that you make. But the actual technical side of actually issuing a share certificate, and you must go through that stage because otherwise they're not legitimately issued, is relatively straightforward. So once the decision's made, it's almost like, there's a simple process for doing that.
So what is essentially, is that not different from selling equity to a Shark Tank scenario? Sorry to dumb it down a bit, but is that pretty similar to the shareholders versus, or is it just because they're not getting 30% of shares?
The mechanics of it are the same. At the end of the day, they will get a share certificate, you'll get the money in the bank.
Okay.
What you may well get as well with the Shark Tank is what's called a shareholder agreement. And that will list a whole load of restrictions that you have on how you might spend that capital. Because the last thing that a Shark Tank a member will want is when the $500,000 goes into your company that you go and buy a yacht and sail off into the sunset. So they'll have clauses in there that says you can only spend within 10% of budget.
Right, I see.
And of course you'll have provided a budget before the investment takes place. So they'll say if you needed $50,000 to buy a new machine to produce the widget that you're selling, and that machine actually turns out to cost $60,000, you'd have to go back to them because it's over the 10%.
But you don't necessarily need that to have that situation in place for shareholders. It can be a very simple transaction, and then proportionately you're just giving back dividends on those shares, or possibly if they decide to sell, then that becomes their decision, and you have to be prepared to sell back to them.
Well, that's another big area, is how does the investor in your shares get their money back? And there are broadly two ways. One of them is, as you say, dividends. And that happens over a period of years. Typically, if you've got a Shark Tank investor or somebody investing for the long term, they'll say, we don't want the money, we want it to go back into the business because we believe you when you told us that your business is going to produce oodles of money in the future. But
they're also looking at the long term. I mean, they get these things. They understand that they've got various plans that are happening on 5, 10, 15-year tracking, and they're in it for the long term, whereas shareholders might go, look, I can give you this money now, but at any time I might need to get it back, and you need to be prepared for that?
Yeah, in that case, shares are probably not the best mechanism. If it's somebody wanting to do a short-term donation of money to your business, you may well be looking at a loan as a much better way of managing that.
And if it's a family member, of course, you don't necessarily, there might not be any interest involved to that, just a repayment plan, for example. So it's just about getting that investment coming in to buy those things. There's loads of options, isn't there?
Yeah, and it could be a delayed repayment. So it says, okay, so you get $20,000 up front, you start paying back in 3 years' time.
When you've got an opportunity to make some money off those funds. And
it could be triggered off when you've got a certain number of customers, but that in a sense is part of the negotiation between you and the person that's loaning you the money. But what I would say for a family member loan is it's always wise to have that conversation that says this money may not ever come back. So if that person that you're taking the money from is dependent on that money, I wouldn't take it. Because that's going to lead you to family rifts, or potential for family rifts in the future, which is
and like
well
with
worth
everything, should you get everything in writing? Of course.
I would.
Yeah. Anybody who's sensible would definitely get anything to do with money in writing. Look, that's fantastic. Look, we're just going to take another short break real quick for some community service announcements. And when we come back, we're going to look at why capital growth is so important for business growth, and why due diligence is so important to get that capital to then grow. You're listening to Small Biz Matters on Triple H 100.1 FM. Now, today we are talking to Brian, and Brian Doricott is an expert in capital fundraising and a pitch expert when it comes to trying to raise capital for your business as well. So thank you for joining us on the show. It's always great to have experts imparting knowledge to our listeners. So we talked a little bit about before the break, talking about the different types of sourcing funds, whether that be crowdsourcing, selling shares, selling a proportion of your business for the purposes of getting equity, bank loans, of course. We haven't sort of touched much on due diligence. So what does due diligence do to improve your chances of being accepted for that funding capital?
Well, due diligence is a process that somebody you don't know uses to get to know you better. So any questions they may ask are generally along the lines of, how can I get to know you better and know about the risks that you have taken on board in the past? So they look at all sorts of things that might have taken place. So I was doing due diligence on a business I was looking to invest in. The first thing I did was went to the internet and type in the name of the person who's running the business.
God, Facebook page is coming back to bite you, huh?
Yeah. And some interesting pages did come up in this particular case about a bit of a shady past. I then discovered that he had some alternative names.
Whoa. Yeah, that's not someone you want to invest in.
No, and I thought, okay, I know enough.
Yeah, I might not go to that meeting. So that's an interesting point. I didn't actually think of the fact that I just thought they'd just be poring over your financials and your business plan and all that paperwork, and you handed in a nice, beautiful, flashy, correctly coloured folder. But really, they're looking at you almost like an audit, it sounds to me like.
Yeah, it is a bit like an audit, and more so. So they'll look at obviously anything on the internet they'll be looking at. They'll be also asking their friends. So in the way that I asked somebody who knew about material science to come and help me out, they will ask their friends. So if somebody's looking to invest in your business and they don't know anything about that particular topic, they'll think, well, who do I know that knows about this? And I'm going to pass it in front of them to check that it does make sense.
So your reputation is quite important too when it comes to due diligence.
So your reputation, certainly when you talk to people, you'll be giving references of yourself as well. So typically they'll check those references, they'll ring them up and ask them questions, and that can they may spend some time doing that to make sure everything's okay. The other thing they may well do, which you may not be aware of, is mystery shop you.
Ooh.
So they'll pretend to be a customer to see how you or your staff respond.
Wow.
When you pick up the phone. And they might be a potential stroppy customer to see how you respond. Do the people on the phone line also believe that this company is really going to succeed, for example?
Right.
Because clearly if the CEO believes it's all going to work but nobody in the company believes, there's some misconnect within the management structure of the company. And they're going to start saying, well, do I really want to invest in something where the first thing I've got to do is fix the company's employees?
So really exactly, because if they're investing in it, then they're taking a proportion of, therefore they're sort of treated in part as a CEO, and they need to re-examine those. And that's not to say that they won't necessarily say an outright no if there's a couple of flaws. They just need to recognise what those flaws are, and therefore how much time and energy and money are they going to have to input into that area of the business to improve it, to bring the rest of it up to what they think is a valuable investment.
Absolutely. I mean, and they're specialists in this area. Generally, people are making these investments continuously. So they will know, there's a problem there, it's fixable, we move on to the next thing. Or does something not quite right, I need to find out more about it because there's something suspicious going on there. So
don't be surprised if you get some really curly, unusual questions when you finally do sit down for that interview, because they will have done, sounds like a huge amount of due diligence. Yeah,
and it'll depend, again, on the quantum of money they're investing. If somebody's investing 10,000, they're going to be doing a lot less due diligence than if they're spending 100,000, which is a lot less than if they're spending $1 million. So it's a case of horses for courses.
And when they're looking at that, obviously they're going to be looking at the financials. They're going to look at your credit rating. It's a given.
They may or may not.
Oh, okay.
Certainly when I was doing investment, we tended not to worry too much about credit ratings. We did look at things like company director listings, making sure they're allowed to be a company director. Again, I have come across a company where the director was actually not allowed to be a company director, been struck off.
Oh, awesome. And then they didn't, or did they even realise?
Oh, yes, they knew.
Oh, okay. They just hadn't done their due diligence by actually being honest.
Yeah, so things like that, of course, are immediate red flags. If somebody's behaving incorrectly, that's immediately a case of you probably won't even get the next call.
And I'm going to put my bookkeeper hat on here and say they've got to make sure, obviously, that all their BASs are up to date. They might, for example, be asked to show a statement from the ATO client integrated account to show what their balance is with the ATO, to show that they're up to date with all of their BAS payments, for example.
Absolutely.
And their tax
Insurance.
Insurance.
Yeah, is workers' comp in place?
Yes.
All those sorts of things are going to be looked at as well.
And also the risk, of course, because we do talk a lot about on this program about admin and doing your due diligence when it comes to that, but also making sure that the relationships that they have with their employees are not incorrect, that they're actually paying them correctly. There's all that aspect going on as well.
And their suppliers. So if you're looking at somebody saying, well, actually, none of their suppliers like them, well, why is that then?
Could their suppliers be called up for due diligence as well?
Could be.
If they're one of the major ones?
Yeah, and if there are a few large suppliers to a particular company, that may well be something they do. One investment I made, funnily enough, we did all the due diligence we possibly could, and 2 months after we put the money in, the supplier went under.
Ouch. And obviously a major supplier as well that affected the business hugely.
Yeah, and the business followed it. About 6 months later.
Okay, so you didn't do your due diligence.
Didn't do enough.
But you can't obviously tick all the boxes if they're an investor. And like you said, it depends on the level of investment. If you're going to go, I'm going to put everything I own, my family's income projected for the next 10 years into this person, you're going to do some serious due diligence and make sure it's done properly. And I presume that out there's people who do this as well. They are due diligence professionals who audit businesses for the purposes of other people investing, right?
They're relatively rare. Because
that sounds like a fun job. I'd love to do that job.
One of the risks for you, if you're employing somebody like that, is they don't have the same concern as you do, because it's your money. Yeah,
it's back to the algorithms and away from the people element.
It's up to you. You know, if it's your money, you're going to be much more keen to make sure it's as right as it can be. And to pick up on another point, for any business angel putting money in, or family who's putting money in, there's that key point. They've got to assume they can lose that money and still have an appropriate lifestyle. So if you are receiving the money, or potentially receiving the money, and you get wind that this person is really going out on a limb, they're remortgaging their house or something like that in order to make the investment, you probably want to think a second time about that, because that means they're going to be in a lot of stress if they think the money's not going to be coming back.
And you're probably going to be in a lot of stress as well, knowing that you've got that burden of that relationship with that person, and that can be quite stressful as a business owner. And we do need to think about bigger picture things. Absolutely. So we do need to think about, we have to look after our investors as much as we would as our employees, and it is something that we are really good at. I'd like to think that the majority of small businesses who have contractors and employees do care about those people who work for them, and do try and look after them. So I think that's hopefully what sets us aside a little bit against the corporate world.
Well, that's why I like working with small businesses, because it's the individuals matter, it's the relationships, all those things are really important. And the people who are running those businesses have a really keen understanding of the damage, in a sense, they can do if they make an error. Probably a bit too much, because they are looking and saying, well, actually, if I don't bring the money in, then I've got 3 people I can't pay the salary of. And that's a really big driver for somebody running a business. It is.
And thinking about the big picture, I mean, I think a lot of small businesses do stagnate and remain the same size and at the same level that they're in, because they don't take that risk. So it's not the only way you can grow, but I think capital growth is a fairly big driver for business growth in general. It's something you have to consider as part of your business plan and forward planning.
Absolutely. Having money in the bank gives you freedom of choice. Having no money in the bank, you have to carry on doing the same thing every day, working continually all hours.
Treading water.
And you're feeling at risk, you're stressful. But if you can increase the amount of money in the bank that you've got, it means that you've got a bit more time to sit back and think, okay, I can take a day off and think about the business rather than be in it, desperately trying to keep the money coming in.
And I suppose it's a bit of a big picture thing as well, where you look at those times when times are really good, when you've just been paid by that major client and you've got a bit of a breather. It's almost that mentality that you would have if you were to suddenly get that injection of funds. You can't take it for granted, of course, but it does give you that moment of openness and ability to see things out from outside, you're in the business, you're working hard, you can take a step back and look at the big picture a little bit more because you've got that breathing space. And I think psychologically, that's another benefit for investing money into your business from outside.
Absolutely. And the other thing it may bring with you or to you is somebody who else is interested in your business part-time. Who might say, actually, the reason I invest in your business is because I can see these other options you haven't thought about.
That's right. They can give you advice.
That's why I've invested.
Yeah.
And by the way, I happen to know how to make it work. I know you don't know how to make it work, but actually it's not that hard to do it if you're prepared to do it.
So flipping the table, we're not just selling the idea, we're actually purchasing. These people might be investing in our business, but in selling to them, we have to consider who we are going into partnership with, and you are shopping around essentially as well. If you were given 3 options, in a perfect world, if you had 3 options of people giving you $20,000, you need to do a little bit of due diligence at that end as well to make sure that the person who is investing in you, what's that relationship? What do they expect? How much input are they going to have? Is that input going to be positive or toxic? There's a lot to consider. And of course, like any major business decision, you don't do this when you are so ridiculously swamped that you're working 20-hour days, 7 days a week, not seeing your family, living at work in a sleeping bag. That's not the time that you think about these things, is it? You think about it in advance. This is my forward planning. I need investment to do this. This is a down period. This is when I'm going to start to do all this research.
Absolutely. And I think there are very few businesses that don't have a down period of at least a week in 1 year.
It's called Christmas. It's because we all do. It's because we all have the down period. So we're all forced to have a down period. So we're all forced to have a holiday. Yeah.
So we all think about what we're going to do, and we all come out in January and think, oh, we should do something different.
Yeah, well, thank goodness the internet's open 24/7, because then we can actually do our research 24/7. Look, this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and there's a lot to take in today. So if, as always, you've missed any of today's show or any of our shows in the past, you can, of course, jump onto the smallbizmatters.com.au website and have a look at our blogs and podcast page. All of our podcasts there are in full, and you can listen along to those for free. And, of course, while you're there, make sure you sign up for our newsletter to get all information that's coming up on the show. Look, thank you so much for coming in today, Brian. I'm sure we'll have you in again. We might get you to come in another couple of months and we can talk a bit more about that pitch and what's involved if you're trying to really sell it and put it all together as a package.
I'll be delighted to come in and speak again.
That's fantastic. Thank you for joining us today. So you're on Small Biz Matters, the half-hour program where you work on your business rather than in it. I will see you all next week for another guest on Small Biz Matters at Triple H 100.1 FM.